These are big concepts right here. These are huge concepts in marketing. Top 5 major marketing concepts of the S-curve. Remember, the S-curve of economics is the reverse engineering of how and why people buy products and services and life cycles of products and services. It's all reverse engineering. It's well known, okay? It's not a philosophy. It's exactly how and why we do what we do, okay? So that's what I teach, okay? That's what's taught by the #1 marketing college in the United States. That's what I teach. You don't find it in chiropractic. I had to go outside to learn all this. Went outside. As soon as my very first seminar outside of chiropractic, and I started seeing this stuff, I'm like, oh no, chiropractors are so off base. I never pay another attention to chiropractors. They're so off base. Because they're pushing their philosophy on people instead of understanding why and how consumers buy and applying those forces. Instead, it's, here's my philosophy, let me just dump it on everybody, and now you got massive rejection, massive. So you got the S-curve, need, so the S-curve we'll pay attention to, need versus service factors. We're going to pay a lot of attention to that. So remember I said there's some major categories we got to pay attention to, and I already covered a couple of them were primary versus secondary pain motivators, primary versus secondary pleasure motivators. Those are major concepts. Need versus service factors. Those are going to be major concepts. We're going to be going into these in great detail. Because guess what happens if the person doesn't have a perceived need and you're marketing service factors? Goose egg. You get nothing. And by the way, that's real common too. You'll market service factors because you don't know the difference. There's no perceived need and you market service factors, and that's why it doesn't work very well. If I don't have a need, I don't care about your service or your product. I don't care. Neither does the market. Service factors are obstacles. We'll pay a lot of attention to the obstacles, and we'll go on into what's called primary or secondary. Again, not only do we want to identify motivation, primary, secondary, all that, same with service factors. We want to identify primary and secondary. Why? Because you need to know what's most important versus least important, okay? You need to know the difference. Because how smart is it going to be to talk about secondary pleasure factors, secondary pain factors, and service factors? I mean, what are you doing in all your marketing right there? You just significantly decrease the effectiveness of it. Okay, so the S-curve. So this is how products and services are consumed, stages of mass consumption. So let me touch base on that just a little bit. And what happens with the S-curve of economics and how markets work. And again, this is the great news about chiropractic, and it's the bad news. So when we talk about the S-curve, it's how products and services are consumed. So products and service enter the market here. This is the number of people that are utilizing the product or service, and this represents time. Time is this way. Number of people utilizing it this way. So a product or service enters the market here. And there's certain things that have to happen. We're not going to get into that right now, but there's certain things that have to happen for more and more people to start utilizing that product or service, okay? So essentially what happens here is the early people get going on it, the very small percentage of people. And most products and services die out right there. 80% of products and services just die out. They don't go into the masses. They go under. That's it. You never hear from them again. Now, the ones that do will jump into a category called the early majority, or the influencers. They'll start using that product or service. And the reason they're called influencers is because they influence. So they are the leaders. And so what happens is when they start utilizing that product or services, the masses start jumping on the bandwagon, start buying that product or service. Now, so the demand for the product skyrockets, goes up right here. So right here, by the way, that's called Morgan's Law. You may have known it as the 10% But that's, to get a product past 10%, that's what happens when you go into Morgan's Law. That's when it gains momentum real fast. That's what everybody tries to do, is they try to get their product or service into the influencer's hands and get that momentum going through the influencers, because they're the ones that drive it into the masses. That's what everybody tries to do with their products or service. That's why they pick Jordan, and that's what, you know, all these people are about. Whether it's celebrities or whatever, those are influencers. That's what they're doing. So, and I'll relate this to you in just a second, okay? Because this is very important to you. So here, everybody starts making a lot of money, and then people find out they're making all the money, and so more people buy the products or services, and then it tapers off. In other words, it gets to the masses. The masses buy the product or service. And then what happens is the little guys eat the big guys. People go out of business, and there's mergers and acquisitions, and then you end up, because remember, we're already in market saturation now for a defined area. Then you end up with two major players, either because people have left the market, or they've been merged, or they went bankrupt, things like that. So you end up with two major players in that particular market. This is the life cycle of products and services. And then what happens to get more of a market share? Now they start competing. They start competing with price, service, and quality. In other words, if you want to get more market share now, what do you have to do with your price? You got to lower it. What do you got to do with your service? You got to increase your service. What do you got to do with quality? You got to increase it. This whole time, what's happening to profitability? It's going down. So this is what happens as the little guys eat the big guys. You end up with two players. Now, in today's market, what are some products and services that this commonly represents? McDonald's, Burger King, Coke, Pepsi. They're already in the masses. And then you have the little players, Dr. Pepper, 2% market, 1% Sprite, whatever, okay? But you have two players that are dominating the market. That's it. And so, here's my point. By the way, this becomes unbelievably important in marketing. And this is why. There's a couple reasons, but first of all, there's only two times you can be ignorant of marketing and do well. In other words, get a lot of business. There's only two times in a market. Number one, if you're the only player, in other words, you're right here and you're the only supplier, you'll get all the business. Now, there's not a lot of business, but it doesn't matter because you're the only player. So you can be totally ignorant. Can I treat people bad there if I'm the only guy? I can treat them bad because there's nobody else giving the product or service. Now, in chiropractic, where does that exist? Do you guys know of anywhere you can open an office and there's no other chiropractors?
Antarctica.
Okay. Now remember, I opened 77 offices in 20 states. I only found one place, and I opened an office there. So there was a county, it was an agricultural county. The county only had 7,000 people, all agricultural. The county hub, population of the city was 750. Okay, we're talking agricultural, right? But what did I know about the statistics of that 7,000 people? 8% of them go to chiropractors annually. Well, where were they going? And by the way, they were middle lower class blue collar because they were agricultural, so they're all high target market chiropractic patients. The typical chiropractic patient is the physical laborer, the person that needs their joints for survival, not the white collar person. So, where were they going? They were going to the next county. Well, what do I know that a limiting factor is? Location, how far you're willing to drive. So what did I immediately know? There's 7,000 people, what's 2% of 7,000? Somebody do the math. Huh? 140? 140 people a year. Well, divide that by 12 months. That's 140 new patients a year. Divide that by 12 months, how many is that over 12 months? At least 12, right? 12, 14, 30, right? So I knew if I put an office there, immediately I was going to capture that market share. Here's what else I knew. That it's the 80-20 principle. It's actually 18-17-3. 3% of the people that were driving far distances, because they had to, they'll still keep doing it. They'll be loyal. But it's only 3% that's loyal. You guys think your patients are loyal? No. 3% of them are. I got doctors who, oh, they're afraid to leave their office. They don't want another associate. I'm like, I'm sorry, I hate to tell it to you. Only 3% of your people quit. If you die or quit, only 3. The rest, 15%, 17%, if the person's okay and does something similar, they'll keep going. 80%, they'll just keep right on moving along. Even though you died, it doesn't matter. The next chiropractor will take care of them. Chiropractors think that way more of their patients are loyal than what they are. It's actually a sad reality. When I stopped practicing, I was like, they're still coming in to see my associates. I'm like, in one way, I'm like, I wanted the patients to be pissed that I wasn't there. They weren't. There was just a few loyal ones, that's it. But by and large, they all kept coming. Where's Dr. Paul? Okay, good. Next, they go to the next guy, the associate. I'm like, well, what about me? They ditched me real quick. So, anyway, we opened an office there. I knew I was going to get 80% of that business right away without doing anything. We opened an office there, and in 12 weeks, we went over 100 patient visits a week. 12 weeks. National average is 107. 6 months, he was seeing 150 visits a week. Population of the city was 750. He's seeing 150. Because where did all those people, did they want to drive to the next county to see a chiropractor now? No, they just went to him now, see? By the way, that's what Palmer College did. It was actually a very, very bad move. You guys know that they were going to put a chiropractic college in Florida State University? Did you guys know that? Do you know who scuttled the number one reason that that did not happen? Palmer College of Chiropractic. Palmer College. Because there was 850 students coming out of Florida going to chiropractic school. So what did they know? What did they know? Anybody that was going to put a school in Florida, what did they know immediately was going to happen? When proximity is the number one reason why, after trust, that you'll pick going to a school. They knew that all they had to do is put a school here, and they'll get 80% of those 850 people instead of them driving out of state, going out of state. So they proactively lobbied against having a chiropractic college in Florida State University, Palmer College of Chiropractic. And then they opened their own college outside of Daytona right there. That was Palmer Chiropractic College that shot that down. And that would have been great credibility to be in with a university like that. Thank you, chiropractic. Once again, your profession. That's why you don't own any category and you have 8% utilization. We got some real big thought leaders, don't we? So, that's the only place. The only other time you cannot have skill or knowledge is here, when the market takes off. Now more people want your product or service than people that supply it. Where does that exist in chiropractic? Kind of done. And as soon as it does happen, what happens? Everybody finds out you're making the money, and what do? They open an office there. That's what they do. And now that goes into market saturation, and now you got to start doing all this. You got to start fighting with product, service, and quality. So there's only 2 times you could be ignorant and get business. And neither one of them lasts very long, because they find out you're making all the money. That's what happens. So you better increase your skill level. Now, I'm going to tell you the big takeaway right now. This is a huge takeaway right now. Remember I told you there's like 5 to 7 major categories you have to know in marketing? This is one of them right here. This is major. We're going to draw a line right here. Now, we're going to apply this to personal injury attorneys and, let's say, chiropractic patients, okay? So what do we know about the chiropractic patient utilization? It's 8%. It's over here. In other words, they already have a need. They're looking. 8% of the population looks for a chiropractor within a year. So there's already a need. They're looking. Does that make sense? Okay. Over here, 92% of the population is not looking for a chiropractor. But what do we know about them? 3 out of 4 of them have a chiropractic problem. How did we know that? How do we know that? Second leading cause of going to the GP, low back pain. Second leading cause to go to the emergency room, low back pain. I'm not even talking about neck pain and the other gateways of chiropractic. I'm just talking about one condition. Second leading cause of workers' compensation, back pain. Now, Fourth leading cause of going to the hospital, motor vehicle accident. What's the number one injury of all motor vehicle accidents on a percentage basis? Soft tissue injury. Major opportunities. But they're all over here. They're all over here. This is a major marketing concept right here. So we talked about the chiropractic patient. Let's talk about the personal injury attorney. What percentage of personal injury attorneys utilize chiropractic services? 25. 75% do not. Now, why do they not? Same reason the majority of people do not. They're confused. They don't know what exactly you do and your benefits. They're confused just like the public's confused. There's no branding at all. As a matter of fact, it's worse with personal injury. Can they have any confusion from a doctor on the stand testifying? No way. Can they have that doctor who's treating a motor vehicle accident talk about how subluxations help with the innate and with the immune system and talk about vaccines and treating cancer? Can a personal injury attorney, can they have that on the stand? Why? It'll do what to the jury? Well, if that's what happens to juries, and juries are the public, right? Then what happens to the public when you do the same thing? That's what happens. So you can't do it. I know there's very few, but there's some attorneys that they'll just flat out say, I will not deal with chiropractors. Why? Not because they have knowledge, it's because they've been branded wrong. They had some interactions with chiropractors that were what I call wacko. The ones that are selling subluxations that say we do everything, asthma, allergy, bedwetting, blah, blah, blah. And an attorney cannot have that. They cannot have that kind of crap in a deposition or a test or in a trial with regular people, 8th grade educated workers on that jury. They cannot, because see, they know it'll destroy the jury. That's why they can't do it. Chiropractors don't realize that destroys, because do you understand that's the jury out there in the market? That's the jury. It's the same jurors that'll be on the stand. It's called the market. It's the same people. So here's the big concept. Whether it's personal injury attorneys are over here, 75%. And also, what did we say statistically? What percentage of personal injury patients are not getting chiropractic care? 2/3. 75% of the attorneys don't use them. 2/3 are not getting care. And 87% of the injuries are soft tissue. How big is this market? But they're not looking for you. Here's the major concept right now. If the target market is over here, there's already a perceived need. If there's already a perceived need, does my marketing have to include need? No. There's already a perceived need. If you're hungry, do I got to talk about getting you hungry? You get my point? Okay. So if there's need, my marketing isn't going to talk about need. This is need. This is service factors. Service factors are obstacles, okay? So if there's already a need, they're going to go to service factors. Who can supply my need? So guess what my marketing should be now? It should be one of those categories. If 10 people have a need and they're looking for something, I want to talk about what they're looking for. I don't want to talk about their need. They already have the need. Do you understand this? Okay. Now, it works just the opposite over here. So you have this massive amount of people over here, right? Patients, attorneys, right? Who are not using chiropractic but have chiropractic problems. They do not have a need. They do not. How do we know they don't? They're not looking for you. They're not seeking your care. They're hungry, they got the problem, but they're going everywhere else to get it taken care of. but they don't have a need. They're not banging on your door. They're not calling you. They're in a state of unconscious incompetence. They don't know what they don't know. So what marketing has to happen over here? You have to establish need here. You have to establish need. And here's what you'll find out as we go along. The core formula, we start with a target market, but the core formula of a purchase is need relative to obstacles divided by trust. So here, there's already a need. Do I need to establish need? No. I need now to go into their service factors. The top 5 service factors, one is going to be trust, price, proximity, quality, and service. We're going to go into those in great detail. But that's after there's a need, that's why they'll pick. Is it a trusted source? What's it cost? How close is it? What, is there a quality factor or is there a service factor? It's one of those reasons. Every industry is different. I'll go through you what the personal injury attorney is. Okay? So, that's a major concept right there. We're going to go into great detail on all this because you need to know this very specifically. Because guess what happens if you're over here talking about a service factor and there's no need? You're wasting your time. What happens if you're talking about if there is need, and by the way, there's not very much because it's a small market, and you're talking about instead of what's the most important service factor, you're talking, say, the 4th most important factor. How far off are you? What if there's no need and you're talking about the 4th service factor? How far off are you? You're in la-la land. You're way off. And this is what happens in marketing all the time. So the first and one of the biggest concepts you got to get out of this is you got to look at the market and think of it in one of 3 ways. When I see attorneys or patients, my mind goes into one of 3 categories because depending on what category it's in is going to be dependent on the marketing I'm going to do. Here's the 3 categories. Is there a need? If there's already a need, my marketing's going straight to service factors. And I preferably want to talk about the primary service factors, the things that's most important to them versus secondary or tertiary. That's how I'm going to get the business, okay? Now remember, there's 3 types of marketing: publicity, advertising, and educational sales, okay? Now, so when I look at a market, I see 3. Everybody's on the S-curve. Do you understand? Every market is on the S-curve. It doesn't matter what business you're in, they're somewhere on that S-curve. Do you understand this? Depending on where they're at on the S-curve is depending on the broad spectrum of marketing I'm going to do. So if there's already a need, by the way, that's not very much, but if there is, I'm coming over to a primary service factor. That's what my marketing is going to say. Now, if there's no need, can I talk about service factors? No. There's no need. There's no need. There's a common mistake chiropractors do. They think they're going to get business because of quality. Because of quality. I'll just get higher educated, I'll get more certifications and all that, and that'll get me more business. No, it won't. Let me give you an example why. Do you know of the Ritz-Carlton? Have you heard them before? Would you know of them as a quality hotel? Okay. Do you plan on staying at the Ritz-Carlton tonight? Why?
This is more convenient for me to think.
There's no need. He doesn't have a need. Do you recognize Ritz-Carlton as being one of the highest quality hotels there is? So he recognizes the quality is off the chart, but he has no intentions on buying that service or product. And how many times do I see chiropractors do this? They think they're going to get more business by increasing their quality, getting certifications and this behind their name and this or that. And what percentage of the population seeks out? Now remember, we're only talking 8% to start with. Out of that 8%, what percent of them seek out quality? 3%. 3% out of 8%. That's how small that market is. So the big takeaway here is understand when you look at it, number 1, is there need first? If there's no need, you have to establish need. There's only one type of marketing that does that out of the 3. Publicity, advertising, or educational sales. It's only educational sales. Advertising is not designed to do that, neither is publicity. That's not what they're for. Do you care if you see an advertisement for the Ritz-Carlton? Doesn't care. See? So, here's the second category. If there's no legitimate need, in other words, if there's not a product or service that person would actually want, even though they don't unconsciously not want it. In other words, if I'm not hungry, am I going to stop at a restaurant? See, so I'm not going to be doing any marketing to sell my food if somebody's not hungry. So one of the things that I'm going to identify in this market is people who do not have a proclivity for a product or service. Now, in a chiropractic patient, who would that be? That would be a chiropractic patient that doesn't have back pain, neck pain, or arthritis or something like that. There's no need, there's no conscious need, and there's no real need. Okay? I'm not going to try to get him as a patient. It's not going to work. So I have to recognize. Now, let me give you an analogy for a personal injury or an attorney. Am I going to go to a divorce attorney and market to a divorce attorney if I'm doing personal injury? You see, I'm going to recognize that they're not part of the market. There's no need for me to talk to them and deal with them. That's the second category. So there is a segment of the market you just want to stay away from. You don't want to waste your time. There is a segment of that. And then there's the big segment, the massive segment over here. They're hungry. Like if they wanted food, okay? In other words, they have personal injury patients. Or in patient's perspective, they have back pain, neck pain, arthritis. But they're not seeking chiropractic care. That's the largest market segment of all. That's where the gold's at. The great news I always say about that is not only is it a massive market, but how much competition do you have going after that market? Zero, because guess how many of you guys know educational sales? It's not taught. It's not taught in chiropractic. I'm the only one that teaches it in chiropractic. It's commonly taught in Fortune 500. It's commonly taught. Not chiropractors. Not chiropractors. You got to push the philosophy if you're a chiropractor. So, that's the large segment. So, if this is the formula, so let's say we already are in a target market, because we're going to go over a target market. So let's say we already have a target market. This is the formula to get that business right there. Establish the need, minimize the obstacles, prefer to do it in a trusting relationship. That's the formula. So if I'm coming over here and I want to get this large amount, 75% of the attorneys who are not working with chiropractors, 2/3 of the auto injury people are not seeking chiropractic care, 87% of them have a soft tissue injury. This is a big market, but it is an unconscious big market. It's an unconscious big market. That's why advertising and publicity will not work. You have to use educational. And here's the difference. Publicity only affects trust, one of 3 of these. Advertising affects 2, obstacles and trust. Educational sales affects all 3, need, obstacles, and trust. That's why educational sales gets this large market, and that's exactly why advertising and publicity will not. Because this large market does not have a perceived need. They do have a problem, but they don't have a perceived need for you. They're going everywhere else. They're going to the GP, the emergency room. They're doing everything else but you. So there is a big market. So let me get to the takeaways on this. Let me sum up and get to the takeaways on this. This is the S-curve. This is how it works. There's a small number of, whether it's personal injury or patients or attorneys. If there is a perceived need, we're going to go to the service factors. There is an order of service factors that they want in a hierarchy. It's trust, proximity, price, quality, service. We'll define those specifically. Right now I'm just being generic, but I'll define those for you. And then you have to know what is called a primary versus a secondary factor. In other words, if I'm going to talk to them about a service factor, I better talk to them about something that's really important to them versus something that's like low on the list. Like I said, this is just an overview. I will be going into the details of all this. So, if they have the need, we're coming over here to the service factors. If they don't have the need, Then we're going to go, well, is it a potential market? Well, there's some people that aren't part of the market. There's people that don't have back pain, neck pain, and headaches. That's a small percent. Out of this segment, the 92%, that's only 25%. 3 out of 4 people have that problem. I mean, I get 10 people in a room, I'm going to get 7 of them as a patient because I know educational sales. Now, from the personal injury attorney perspective, most of the attorneys aren't using them, and they have the majority of their cases. The majority of their cases are soft tissue. So you should be the primary provider. Again, but they don't know it though. So if they're over here, I have to use educational sales. I have to establish need. Then I have to address the obstacles relative to trust. That's what I have to do here. That's what I have to do here. Now, once you know how to do that, you get a lot of business. Why do you get a lot of business? 75% of the attorneys don't work with chiropractors. 2% of the population is in automobile accidents every year. 87% of the injuries are soft tissue injuries. Low back pain is the second leading cause of GP, second leading cause of emergency room, second worker. You see what this is? There's a massive market. That's how I was able to open 77 offices in 20 states. I did not wait around for the 8% and use advertising. Does that make sense? And that's why I could talk to attorneys and sell them left or right, or get with a group of people, a target market of patients, get 10 people in a room, 7 of them are going to be patients of mine, and guess how many of them were looking to go to a chiropractor? None of them. None of them. That's the difference between publicity, advertising, and educational sales. That's what we're going to go into in detail.